They shoved Alara onto the frozen courtyard stones in nothing but the threadbare dress she had been wearing when they dragged her from the servant quarters. 300 wolves watched. Her former alpha, Declan Voss of the Thornfield Pack, stood on the judgment platform with his beta and his newly chosen Luna clinging to his arm like a trophy, sneering down at Alara as though she were a stain he had finally scrubbed clean. But then the iron gate screamed open. A figure stepped through the snow and the torchlight, and the entire courtyard dropped to its knees before their minds could catch up with their bodies. The Lycan King himself, Kieran Voss. His golden eyes swept the crowd, passed over every kneeling wolf, and landed on Alara with the force of a cathedral bell. He crossed the courtyard in 6 strides. He unclasped his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. Then he turned to Declan and said, in a voice so quiet it cut deeper than any roar, "She rejected me once. She will never need to again. But you will kneel for what you have done, and you will not rise until I permit it." The bone pendant weighed less than an acorn, but it had carried Alara through 6 years of darkness. She stood in the narrow crawl space beneath the Thornfield kitchens, pressing the small carved wolf skull against her collarbone, while the ceiling shook with the footsteps of wolves preparing for the frost moon banquet above. Dust fell in thin curtains. The single candle she owned guttered in the draft. This was her world, a damp rectangle of earth and old stone, 4 feet from floor to ceiling, just wide enough to lie down if she pulled her knees to her chest. Her possessions fit in one hand: a comb missing 3 teeth, a stub of tallow candle, a square of cloth that had once been her mother's headscarf, faded from crimson to a pale, exhausted pink. And the pendant, always the pendant. Her mother had carved it herself from the jawbone of a white deer the winter before the fever took her. Alara had been 9 years old. She remembered her mother's hands, thin and steady, working the bone with a kitchen knife while the fire crackled low. She remembered her mother's voice, roughened by illness but still warm at the center. The way bread is warm when you break it open. "Wear this against your skin," her mother had said. "When the world is loud and cruel, press it close and listen. You will hear me." Alara had listened every night for 6 years. She had never heard anything but her own heartbeat. But she kept listening. She kept pressing the bone against her throat. Hope was a luxury taxed out of her long ago, but habit was free. Above her, the kitchen erupted in noise. Pots clanged. Someone shouted for more rosemary. The head cook, Marta, a thick-armed woman with a permanent scowl and an unexpected streak of decency, stomped across the floor so hard that a fresh shower of dust fell into Alara's hair. "Where is that wolfless girl?" Marta bellowed. "The banquet cloths need pressing, and the silver is still black." Alara closed her eyes. She tucked the pendant beneath her collar, blew out the candle to save what remained of it, and crawled toward the narrow wooden hatch that connected her crawl space to the kitchen. She pressed it open with her shoulder. Light and heat hit her like a wall. The kitchen was enormous, built to feed 300 wolves on feast nights, and tonight every surface blazed with activity. Spits turned over open fires. Bread dough rose in stone ovens. The smell of roasting boar and honey parsnips thickened the air until it felt like something you could chew. Alara's stomach clenched. She had eaten once today. A heel of bread Marta had tossed toward her crawl space at dawn without looking, the way you might toss a scrap to a dog you were not supposed to be feeding. Alara had caught it. She always caught it. She was good at catching things that were not quite meant for her. She emerged from the hatch, brushed the dust from her dress, and stood. 2 kitchen omegas glanced at her and looked away immediately. That was the protocol. You did not hold eye contact with a wolfless. To do so was to acknowledge them as wolves, and a wolfless was not a wolf. A wolfless was a gap in the pack registry, a line through a name, a body that took up space without contributing to the collective strength. Every pack in the Northern Territories ranked the same way. Alpha at the summit, then Beta, then ranked wolves by bloodline and power, then Omegas, the lowest shifted wolves, and beneath them, beneath everything, the wolfless, those born into pack families who reach the age of 16 and fail to shift. Something broken in the blood, the elders said. A corruption, a hollow. In Thornfield, the wolfless wore iron collars. Not enchanted, not cruel in any mechanical way. Simply iron, thin and cold, fitted around the throat like a brand. It told every nose and range that the wearer carried no wolf, no power, no status. It told the world that the person beneath it was tolerated, not accepted, endured, not embraced. Alara touched her collar as she crossed the kitchen. The metal was always cold. Even in summer, even pressed against her pulse for hours, it never warmed. She had worn it since the morning after her 16th birthday, when the pack healer had examined her, shaken his head, and signed the registry notation in red ink. Wolfless, classification permanent. The healer had not been unkind. That was almost worse. He had patted her shoulder and said, "Some seeds simply don't take root, child," as if she were a failed crop, as if her entire existence were a gardening disappointment. Alara pressed the silver and began to polish. The banquet was for the frost moon, the most sacred night in the Thornfield calendar, when the Alpha reaffirmed his bond with the pack and, if mated, presented his Luna to the assembled wolves beneath the open sky. Tonight, Alpha Declan would present Portia, his chosen Luna, the woman he had selected 3 months after rejecting Alara. Alara's hands moved mechanically over the silver. She did not let herself think about Declan's hands. She did not let herself remember the way he used to find her in the kitchen corridor after everyone else had gone to bed, the way he would lean against the wall with that crooked smile and say, "There you are. I have been looking everywhere." She did not remember, and yet her body remembered for her. The warmth of his palm on the small of her back. The way his scent, wood smoke, and wild sage used to make her feel like the safest creature in the world. The night he had taken her hand at the high table and said, before his entire pack, before his mother and his beta and 300 witnesses, "This is my fated mate. This is my Luna." The hall had cheered. Alara had wept with joy. She had believed him. Every cell in her body had believed him. The bond had been real. She had felt it ignite, a golden thread between her chest and his, vibrating with certainty. Fated, chosen, hers. But a wolfless Luna was an abomination. His mother had made that clear at the emergency council session 2 weeks later, the one Alara heard through the floorboards of the Alpha study while she knelt above, pressing her ear to the wood, praying she was wrong. "The other packs will devour us," his mother had said. "A Luna who cannot shift, a Luna who wears a collar. You might as well surrender the territory now." Declan had not defended her. He had sat in silence, jaw tight, eyes on the oak table, and Alara had watched through the crack in the floorboards as her future folded in on itself like paper touched by flame. He rejected the bond formally 3 days later. In the great hall, before the entire pack, Alara had felt it break, a sound inside her chest like a branch snapping under ice, and the pain had driven her to her knees on the stone floor. No one had reached for her, no one had spoken. 300 wolves had watched her fall, and the silence had been louder than any howl. Afterward, they took her quarters. They gave her the crawl space. They fitted the collar and reassigned her to the lowest duties: scrubbing, hauling, serving. Existing at the margins of a world that had briefly, impossibly let her stand at its center. That was 3 months ago. Now the silver gleamed. The banquet cloths lay pressed and folded. And somewhere above her, in the great hall hung with pine boughs and frost lanterns, Declan was preparing to present his new Luna to the wolves who had watched Alara fall. Marta appeared at her elbow. The older woman's face was its usual mask of irritation, but her voice dropped low enough that only Alara could hear. "He wants you serving wine tonight." Alara's hands stopped moving. In the hall, at a high table, Marta's jaw worked as if she were chewing something bitter. "Portia's request. She wants you in a fresh collar, polished." The information landed in Alara's chest like a stone dropped into still water. She understood. Of course she understood. This was not service. This was theater. Portia wanted the former mate, the rejected wolfless girl, serving wine at the very table where she had once sat as Luna. A living reminder to every wolf in the hall of what Alara had been and what she had lost. Alara picked up the polished silver. Her reflection stared back at her from the curved surface, distorted and strange, a girl with dark circles under her eyes and a collar at her throat. "Tell them I will be there," she said. Marta studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and produced a small bread roll, still warm. She set it on the counter without a word and walked away. Alara ate the roll in 4 bites. She pressed her palm against the bone pendant beneath her collar. She did not cry. She had emptied that well weeks ago, wrung it dry like a cloth, squeezed until the fibers split. But somewhere beneath her ribs, in the hollow space where the bond scar lived, something stirred. Faint as a candle in a cave, patient as bone. The great hall was a cathedral of firelight and fur. Pine boughs draped every rafter. Frost lanterns hung from iron chains, casting the room in a pale blue glow that made the assembled wolves look like creatures from a winter myth. 300 of them filled the long tables, dressed in ceremonial leathers and furs. The noise was enormous. Laughter, howls, the crack of tankards meeting in toast after toast. Alara moved through it like a ghost. She wore a fresh linen shift, clean but thin. The collar at her throat had been polished until it caught the lantern light with every step, which was precisely the point. She carried a pitcher of spiced wine and kept her eyes on the floor and her shoulders straight. She would not bend. She would not hunch. They could put her in iron and linen, but they could not make her small. She reached the high table. Declan sat at the center in the alpha's carved oak chair, broad-shouldered and golden-haired, handsome in the way that sharp things are handsome. Portia sat beside him, dark-haired, fine-boned, draped in white fur that probably cost more than everything Alara had ever owned combined. Portia's wolf was strong. Her bloodline was immaculate. Her family controlled 3 trade routes through the Western Pass. She was, by every metric the pack valued, a perfect Luna. She was also watching Alara approach with a smile that never reached her eyes. Alara filled Declan's goblet first. Protocol demanded it. Her hand did not shake. She would not allow it to shake. Declan did not look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on the hall, on his wolves, on the future he had purchased by discarding her. But Alara saw his throat move. A single swallow, the only evidence that her proximity cost him anything at all. She moved to Portia's goblet. "Careful," Portia murmured, just loud enough for Alara to hear over the din. "We would hate for you to spill on my fur." Alara poured. Not a drop escaped the rim. She stepped back. Declan rose. The hall fell silent with the trained obedience of wolves who knew their alpha's rhythms. He lifted his goblet. "Tonight we celebrate the frost moon. Tonight we honor the bond between alpha and pack, between strength and loyalty, between the wolves who lead and the wolves who follow." His voice carried effortlessly. He had always been good at speeches, good at making people feel chosen. And tonight, he continued, placing his hand on Portia's shoulder, I present to you my chosen Luna, Portia Hale of the Western Ridge, strong of blood, pure of wolf, worthy of Thornfield. The hall erupted. Cheers, howls, fists pounding on tables. Portia stood, radiant, triumphant, and Alara stood 3 feet behind her holding a wine pitcher, and the distance between them was not 3 feet. It was infinite. Declan turned to the assembled wolves and said the words that would finalize the bond. Does any wolf here contest this choice? Silence. Tradition demanded the question. Tradition expected silence in return. But something happened that no one in the hall expected, least of all Alara herself. She set down the pitcher. The sound of ceramic on oak cut through the silence like a knife. Every eye in the hall turned to her. Alara's heart hammered, her hands trembled at her sides. The bone pendant pulsed against her chest, warm, almost hot, and in that warmth she heard something she had never heard before. Her mother's voice, faint as a breath. Stand. I contest, Alara said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. In a hall of 300 wolves with preternatural hearing, a whisper was a shout. Declan turned slowly. His face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed him. Shock, then fury, then something that looked, just for a heartbeat, like grief. You have no standing, he said. His voice was level, controlled, the voice of an alpha managing a disruption. You are wolfless. You hold no rank. You cannot contest. The law says any member of the pack may contest a Luna selection, Alara replied. She had read it. In the dusty charter scrolls, no one thought the wolfless girl could reach on the library's top shelf. She had stood on a stool at midnight and read every line. I am a member of this pack. The collar does not strip membership. It strips status, not belonging. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Declan's beta stepped forward. A thick-necked wolf named Graves, who had never liked Alara and did not bother hiding it. You are making a fool of yourself, Graves said. Sit down before the alpha is forced to discipline you. Alara looked at Declan. Not at Graves, not at Portia, at Declan, the man who had held her hand and called her his mate, the man who had let her fall. I do not contest because I want you back, she said. The words came from somewhere deep and steady. I contest because you are building your future on the bones of a lie. You told this pack I was unworthy. You told them a wolfless mate was a weakness. But you felt the bond, Declan. You felt it and you broke it because you were afraid. The hall was so quiet she could hear the frost lanterns hissing. Declan's jaw tightened. Remove her. Graves moved toward her. 2 ranked wolves flanked him. Alara did not step back. She stood in her thin linen shift with her polished collar and her mother's pendant hidden beneath it, and she held her ground. You can remove me, she said. You can send me back to the cellar. But every wolf in this hall heard me, and they will remember. Graves seized her arm. His grip was iron. He hauled her toward the side door, and Alara did not scream. She did not beg. She walked, spine straight, chin level, and 300 wolves watched her go. And not one of them spoke. The side door opened into the courtyard. Graves shoved her through. She stumbled on the frozen stones, caught herself, and straightened. The cold hit her immediately, biting through the linen, finding every inch of exposed skin. Her breath clouded white in the torchlight. Graves slammed the door behind her. The bolt shot home. Alara stood alone in the courtyard, barefoot on ice, and pressed her hand against the pendant beneath her collar. The bone was burning hot now, almost too hot to touch, and the stirring beneath her ribs, the faint, patient thing that had been waiting and waiting in the dark, surged. Not a wolf, not yet, but close, so close she could feel it breathing. 3 hours later, the horn sounded. Alara was huddled against the courtyard wall, arms wrapped around herself, frost crystallizing on her eyelashes. She had not gone back to the crawl space. Something held her here. The same tug behind her sternum, the same pull that had no name and no logic, but was as undeniable as gravity. The horns were deep and long. 4 blasts. Not 3. 4 blasts had not sounded at Thornfield in living memory. 4 blasts meant the crown. Alara pressed herself into the shadow of a stone buttress as the courtyard erupted with activity. Guards scrambled. Torches were lit along the gate passage. The great iron gates groaned open, and through them came a column of riders on horses the color of midnight, flanked by wolves in half-shift, their eyes glowing amber in the dark. And at the column's head, on foot, as if he preferred to meet the world at ground level, walked a man who made the torchlight seem dim. He was tall. That registered first. Taller than Declan by half a head, with shoulders that spoke of a body built for war rather than ceremony. His hair was dark, nearly black, worn longer than fashion dictated, brushing the collar of a coat that looked like it had been cut from the night itself. His face was not handsome the way Declan's was handsome. It was something else, something older, something that suggested his features had been assembled not for beauty, but for authority. And beauty had arrived anyway, uninvited and uncontested. But his eyes stopped her heart. Gold, not amber, not hazel. Gold, bright and depthless, the color of the first blood, the Lycan line that predated every pack and every territory and every law that wolves lived by. King Kieran Voss, the Lycan king, ruler of the 12 territories. The wolf they called the Stone Throne because, it was said, he had never shown mercy and never needed to. Alara had heard the stories. Every wolfless girl in every cellar had heard them. He was more beast than man. He had torn a rogue alpha's throat out with his bare hands at a summit and returned to his seat to finish his wine. He did not take a Luna because no woman alive could survive the weight of his bond. He was 28 years old and had already outlasted 3 assassination attempts, 2 border wars, and 1 attempted coup, emerging from each with less patience and more power. He terrified the Northern Territories. He terrified the world, and he was walking directly toward the Great Hall of Thornfield with a stride that suggested he already owned it and was merely arriving to inspect the property. But as he passed through the courtyard, something happened. He stopped, his head turned, not toward the hall, not toward the guards scrambling to form an honor line, toward the shadow where Alara pressed herself against the cold stone wall. His nostrils flared, his gold eyes widened by a fraction so small that only someone watching his face with desperate intensity would have caught it. Alara was watching his face with desperate intensity. She could not look away. The pull behind her sternum detonated. It was not a tug anymore, it was a hurricane, a wave of heat and recognition, and something so primal it bypassed her brain entirely and spoke directly to her blood, her bones, her marrow. The bone pendant blazed against her chest. The stirring beneath her ribs roared to life, and for the first time in her existence, Alara felt something inside her that was not human. It was wolf. It was vast. And it was answering him. Kieran stared at her. She stared back. 2 seconds. 3. An eternity compressed into the space between heartbeats. Then one of his guards spoke, murmured something about the alpha waiting inside, and the moment broke. Kieran turned away. He walked into the hall. The doors closed. Alara slid down the wall until she sat on the frozen stones, gasping, shaking, the pendant searing her skin, the thing inside her howling without sound. She did not understand what had happened, but her body understood. Every cell, every nerve, every drop of blood that her mother had given her understood. And in the great hall, she heard the music stop. She heard the silence fall. She heard a voice like bedrock and low thunder say, "Who is the girl in the courtyard wearing iron at her throat?" The side door opened. Not Graves this time. A woman in the king's black livery, calm-eyed, efficient, who looked at Alara's bare feet and thin dress and collar with an expression that was not pity, but something closer to controlled fury. "The king requests your presence," she said. "Requests, not demands." Alara stood. Her legs were numb. Her heart was a war drum. She followed the woman through the door and into the great hall, and 300 wolves turned to look at her for the second time that night. Kieran stood at the center of the hall, not at the high table, not on the platform. At the center, as if he had rearranged the geometry of the room simply by choosing where to stand. Every wolf in the hall was on one knee, including Declan, including Portia, including Graves, whose face had gone the color of wet ash. Kieran's gold eyes found Alara the instant she entered. The pull between them tightened until she could barely breathe. He studied her, the torn linen, the bare feet, the polished collar catching the lantern light. The way she held herself despite all of it, straight-backed and unbroken, a woman who had been stripped of everything and still refused to kneel. Something moved behind those gold eyes, something vast and ancient and dangerously tender. "Come here," he said quietly. Alara walked forward. She did not kneel. She did not drop her gaze. She walked to the center of the hall and stood before the Lycan king and looked into his golden eyes and felt the thing inside her. The wolf she had been told she did not possess rise to the surface of her skin like heat rising from sun-baked stone. Kieran reached for the collar. Alara flinched. He stopped. His hand hovered an inch from the iron, and his expression changed. The authority softened. The king receded, and something else looked out through those gold eyes. Something raw, something that recognized her not as a political piece or a strategic asset, but as the other half of a wound he had been carrying without knowing its name. "May I?" he asked. Not commanded. Asked. Alara's throat closed. Her vision blurred. She nodded. Kieran's fingers closed around the iron collar and tore it apart. The crack was clean, sharp, absolute. It echoed off the stone walls and rang through the rafters and silenced the last whisper of doubt in every wolf's mind about what was happening. The two halves fell to the floor. Air touched Alara's throat. She pressed her fingers to the raw groove in her skin and drew a breath that felt like the first breath she had taken in 6 years. Kieran looked at the broken collar on the floor. Then he looked at Declan. "Stand up," Kieran said. Declan stood. He was trying to maintain composure, but his scent betrayed him. Fear, sour and unmistakable, bled through his carefully constructed authority. "Your Majesty," Declan began, "she is wolfless." "She is my mate," Kieran said. The 3 words landed like stones dropped from a great height. They crushed the air in the hall. They crushed the argument in Declan's mouth. They crushed the foundation of every justification Thornfield had ever built for the way it treated its wolfless. "That is not possible," Portia said from behind Declan, her voice high and thin. "She has no wolf. The bond cannot form without a wolf." Kieran did not look at Portia. He did not need to. His attention remained on Declan the way a blade remains on the throat it is pressed against. "You felt a bond with her," Kieran said. "It was not a question. You claimed her before your pack, and then you broke that bond because she did not meet the conditions your mother set for your political future." Declan's jaw worked. No sound came out. "You collared a fated mate. You put her in a cellar. You made her serve wine at the table where she once sat beside you." Kieran's voice did not rise. It descended, each sentence lower, quieter, and more devastating than the last. "And tonight, when she stood before your pack and spoke the truth, you had her dragged out and thrown into the cold." He paused. in a linen shift, barefoot, in the frost moon. The hall was silent, not the respectful silence of wolves listening to their alpha, the terrified silence of creatures who understood they were in the presence of something that could end them. Kieran turned to Alara. The severity in his face dissolved. What remained was something Alara had no framework for. Gentleness from the most powerful wolf alive, directed at her, the girl the world had declared hollow. "You do have a wolf," he said softly. "I can feel her. She has been dormant, not absent, waiting for a bond strong enough to wake her." The pendant against Alara's chest pulsed. The heat spread from her collarbone downward, through her ribs, into her belly, into the base of her spine. Something inside her expanded, not painfully, beautifully, like a flower opening in accelerated time, like a window thrown wide in a room that had been sealed for years. She gasped. Her knees buckled. Kieran caught her. His arms closed around her, steady and warm and smelling of pine resin and cold iron and something beneath both that was purely him, purely hers, a scent her blood recognized even if her brain was still catching up. Her vision split. Gold flooded the edges. She felt her bones hum, her muscles shift, her skin tighten and ripple with something that was not pain, but was too enormous to be called pleasure. The wolf rose, not violently, not with the dramatic explosion the stories described, slowly like dawn, like the tide coming in, like a song you had been humming your whole life, finally finding its lyrics. Alara did not shift, not fully, not yet, but the wolf surfaced behind her eyes, and every wolf in the hall felt it. A presence so powerful that 3 wolves nearest to her involuntarily dropped to their knees, not from command, but from the sheer gravitational weight of what was waking inside the woman they had called hollow. Kieran held her. His gold eyes met hers, and through the bond, the real bond, the bond that sang between them like a wire pulled taut between 2 stars, he said nothing. He did not need to. She felt it. Home. Not a place, a person, a heartbeat answering hers. Kieran straightened. He kept one arm around Alara's waist and turned to face the hall. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of every king who had ever held the Lycan throne. "This woman is my fated mate. She is under my protection. Any wolf, any pack, any territory that harms her, collars her, or denies her standing will answer to the crown, not to my courts, not to my envoys, to me." He looked at Declan. "Thornfield will abolish the hollow collar within 7 days. Every wolfless member of this pack will be granted full rights and healer valuation for dormant wolves. Failure to comply will result in the revocation of your charter and the redistribution of your lands." Declan's mouth opened, closed. His hands hung at his sides, and Alara saw them trembling. "She rejected me," Declan said hoarsely. "Tonight, before the whole pack? She said she did not want me back." Kieran looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "She rejected a man who put her in chains," Kieran said. "She did not reject love. She rejected cowardice." He turned to the hall. "She rejected the alpha who broke her in public. She did it with more dignity than anyone in this room has shown her in 3 months. Remember that. Remember what courage looks like when it has nothing left to lose." He looked at Alara. The Stone King. The wolf, they said, had never shown mercy. He looked at her, and his expression held every mercy he had ever kept hidden from the world. "We leave tonight," he said. "She takes nothing from this place. Nothing from Thornfield has ever deserved her." He paused. His gold eyes found Declan one final time. Let him remember what he threw away. Let him watch the collar fall and know that he was the one who put it there. Alara walked out of the great hall of Thornfield on the arm of the Lycan King. She was barefoot. She was wearing a torn linen shift beneath a coat that smelled like pine and sovereignty. And as they crossed the courtyard where she had shivered alone 3 hours before, Alara pressed her hand against the bone pendant her mother had carved and felt it hum. Not with heat this time, with song. A low, clear note, like a wolf's howl heard from very far away, carrying across mountains and years and grief until it arrived exactly where it needed to be, in a girl who had been told she was nothing, by a mother who had known, somehow, that the nothing was a lie. 7 months later, the bone pendant hung from a silver chain in a greenhouse at Ironhold Keep. Alara had placed it there herself, looping the chain around the lowest branch of a young birch tree she had planted in a clay pot the week she arrived. The tree was small but stubborn. Its bark was white as fresh snow, its leaves trembling and green, and when Alara pressed her palm against its trunk each morning, she felt a warmth that reminded her of the river stone, of bread rolls slipped onto counters, of every small kindness that had kept her alive when the world insisted she should not be. Ironhold had been overwhelming at first. The keep was ancient, enormous, carved into the shoulder of a granite mountain, with towers that disappeared into the clouds and corridors so long that their far ends were rumors. It was nothing like Thornfield. Where Thornfield performed ceremony, Ironhold simply existed, with the quiet confidence of a place that had outlasted centuries and saw no reason to announce itself. Alara had expected hostility. She had braced for the whispers, the sidelong glances, the slow erosion of tolerance that she had learned to navigate in Thornfield. And some of that came. The nobility of the Lycan court was not universally welcoming to a former wolfless scullery girl from a mid-tier northern pack. There were skeptics. There were smears. There were elaborate political maneuvers designed to test whether she would break under the pressure of a world she had no training for. She did not break. She had survived the cellar. She had survived the collar. She had survived the Great Hall. She survived the court the same way, not with aggression, not with submission, with presence, with steady eyes and an open hand and a refusal, absolute and unshakable, to become what they expected her to be. One by one, the skeptics fell quiet, not because she defeated them, because she outlasted them. The wolf had fully awakened 2 months after her arrival at Ironhold. The keep's healers had examined her, gently, thoroughly, and confirmed what Kieran had known in the courtyard at Thornfield. Her wolf had been dormant, not absent, suppressed by years of malnutrition and the particular kind of despair that settles into the body when the mind is told daily that it is deficient. The shift, when it came, happened at dawn on a Tuesday in the keep's eastern meadow, with dew on the grass and the mountains turning gold with the first light. Kieran had been beside her. He had not coached or pushed or made it ceremonial. He had simply said, "She is ready when you are ready." And Alara had closed her eyes, pressed the bone pendant to her lips, and let go. The wolf that emerged was white, not silver, not gray, not the pale blonde that some northern wolves carried, white, pure, and absolute as the birch bark, as the bone of the pendant, as the snow on the mountains that had watched over her mother's grave for 6 years. The healers had gone very still. Kieran had knelt in the wet grass, which was not something the Lycan king did for anyone, and pressed his forehead against her wolf's muzzle. Through the bond, she felt what he felt. Not surprise, recognition, as if he had always known what she carried and had simply been waiting for her to find it herself. The hollow collar decree went into effect the same week. Kieran signed it in the throne room with Alara standing his right hand. Across the Northern Territories, wolfless individuals were reclassified from outcast to protected members, subject to healer evaluation for dormancy, eligible for treatment, and guaranteed the same rights as any shifted wolf. The decree met resistance. 4 packs in the Western Range refused compliance. Kieran had prepared envoys. Alara had insisted on writing the letters herself. She wrote without accusation, without threats. She wrote about the crawl space and the collar and the woman in the kitchen who had given her bread. She wrote about what it felt like to be told you were broken, and then to discover that you had been whole all along, waiting for someone to stop telling you otherwise. 3 of the 4 packs complied within 6 weeks. The 4th was still holding out, but their wolfless members had begun arriving at Ironholt's gates, quiet and thin and blinking in the mountain sunlight like creatures emerging from underground. Alara met each one. She held their hands and said, "You are not hollow. You never were." Reports from Thornfield arrived monthly. Declan had complied with the decree, abolished the collars, restructured the pack hierarchy. He ruled adequately. He kept his border secure. Portia had quietly left the pack 4 months after the Frost Moon banquet, and no new Luna had been announced. Alara thought of him sometimes. Not with love, not with hatred, with the strange, specific sadness reserved for people who could have been more than they chose to be. She hoped he found his way. She did not wait for it. This morning, the greenhouse was warm with early light. Alara knelt beside the birch tree and pressed her palm against the bark. The warmth traveled up her arm, through her chest, and settled into the place where her wolf rested, awake and calm and golden, a presence as steady as her own heartbeat. The bone pendant turned slowly on its silver chain, catching the light. "You are up early." Kieran stood in the doorway. He wore sleek clothes, his dark hair disordered, his gold eyes soft with the particular warmth he kept for mornings when the world was quiet and belonged to no one but the 2 of them. "The tree has a new branch," Alara said. He crossed to her, crouched beside her, studied the pale green shoot reaching upward from the highest fork. "It knows spring is coming. We all do." Kieran slid his arm around her waist. Alara leaned into him, his warmth, his scent, the steady drum of his heartbeat against her back. Through the bond, she felt what he felt, contentment so deep it had no bottom, a love that did not perform or demand or require proof, a love that simply was, like bedrock, like roots, like the quiet turning of the earth beneath the snow. Alara thought of the girl in the courtyard, the frozen stones beneath bare feet, the iron collar, the bone pendant clutched like a prayer against a chest that the world had declared empty. That girl was not gone. She lived inside Alara the way the wolf did, a part of the whole, a chapter in a story that kept writing itself forward. Alara would not erase her. She would carry her gently, the way you carry a candle through a dark corridor, carefully, so the flame survives. Outside the greenhouse, the keep was waking. Footsteps in distant corridors, the clatter of kitchens, the low murmur of guards at the gate. A world in motion, wolves running, howling, living their complicated and beautiful and deeply imperfect lives. Alara kissed Kieran's jaw, the angle where bone met the soft skin beneath his ear, and stood. "Come on," she said. "There is work to do." She left the greenhouse with the king beside her and the tree humming at her back, and the morning light fell across them both like a blessing, warm and golden and new. The collar was gone. The wolf was awake. The story was not over, but for the first time in her life, Alara believed the next chapter would be kind. Thank you for listening. If this story made your heart race, your eyes sting, or something inside you whisper yes, then you felt exactly what Alara felt when her wolf finally woke. That connection, that catch in your chest, that is the magic of stories like these. And we have so many more waiting for you. Hit that like button if Kieran's words, "Let him remember what he threw away," gave you chills. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the collar is never the end of the story. and subscribe so you never miss another tale of fated mates, broken bonds, and wolves who refuse to stay hollow. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the collar breaking, the white wolf rising at dawn, or the moment she stood in that great hall and said, "I contest," with nothing but her voice and her spine? Drop your answer below. Your pack is here. Welcome home.